Okay, and we are live on our recorded podcast. This is Stefan and Rain, and you're listening to Unprecedented. This is the second episode of our podcast. We're really excited about this. And we actually just had both some great news and information come across our desks over the last 24 hours. And all of that actually feeds so beautifully into our topic for today, which is intrinsic change. Now, when we were picking this topic, Rain, you had some really interesting reasons why you wanted to do this. You were saying that you had such a deep resonance with that word intrinsic. Maybe you want to share a little bit about that, and so just to kick us off.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and I guess it'd be good evening to you,
Yeah.
Stefan. Uh, well, intrinsic is going within. That's
Mm,
what it's all about. It's about identifying, you know, ourselves on an inner level of progression, right? So, what does that mean? Because those sound like a lot of big words. Basically, what we're talking about is, based on what you and I discuss, is going within and doing that shadow work, but also tapping into the light that is within us because we know that we're spiritual beings, correct?
right. Right.
So it's all about merging those two together and that they co-facilitate one another to help us evolve, to help us
Mm,
grow, to help us move forward. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean that we look outside for external uh, validation or um, external I guess I'll use guidance as a word, but that's
hmm.
not the exact word I'm looking for. But it's about going within first, because if we're uh, off kilter and we're not aligned with who we genuinely and uniquely and authentically are within, then we're going to have some issues arise in our lives, and we're going to see that happen.
Absolutely, for sure. And I it's so interesting that you bring up the issue around the shadow and the light work and then combining those two as well, because I take a slightly different viewpoint on change and intrinsic change specifically. But at the same time, I think it's two halves of the same whole, which is why these conversations are so intriguing to me. For me, I look at it as, leading on from last week's discussion about light work and shadow work and using that to evolve. I find that change is in everything. It's the scientists say it's the only constant in the universe. And
Hmm.
yet we all know that change is incredibly scary for
Yes.
everybody, right? I think
Hmm. Yeah.
psychologists even say that moving home can be the third most traumatic thing that can happen to you as a human mentally,
And
which
what do you
is
mean by that, or what did they mean by that? Moving
so
home.
when they were saying like move, like if you're changing cities and uprooting your entire life and going to somewhere completely new and
Oh, right.
unfamiliar, it's incredibly traumatic. And sometimes even if you're moving home within the same city, just especially if you've lived in the same home for quite a number of years,
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
can be traumatic because your environment is changing.
Right. And we're
And
and
I
we're creatures of habit, right? We're creatures of
exactly,
habit. So
you know.
we get used to a routine. And I remember when I moved within the city. I moved with the kids when they were
Hmm.
younger, and I caught myself driving back from the university to my old home one one day after
Right.
class, right? And I'm like, oh, wait a minute, no, that's the
That's
wrong house. I don't live
exactly.
there anymore, you know. So, having lived there for, some 13 years, my brain was just on autopilot.
For sure, I imagine that that is exactly what would happen. I mean, I even know just going for a walk in my neighborhood, if I choose a different route, I will have to stop and be like reorient myself just to get home.
Right.
And this is the
Right.
neighborhood I live in, it's
Right.
somewhere that I travel around every day. But I know from friends of mine, because I've moved around a lot growing up. So I got used to that. It's actually now
Oh,
become more difficult for me to stay in one
to
place.
stay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's the change is weird for me. It's like weird to not be changing. That's
Well,
a
well,
mental shift for me.
right, and there's two sides to that coin, right? Because you were moving all the time, and so you were pulled into, you know, feelings of spontaneity,
Right.
excitement, novelty, all of those things, which can be positive in
Yes,
change.
absolutely. Absolutely. But then I speak to friends of mine who've lived in the same suburb for 30 odd years. They grew up there, they went to school there. They have all these experiences which are quite frankly weird to me. Like they'll remember people from their middle school. And they'll be like, don't you have friends from middle school? I'm like, I can barely remember who my teachers were in middle school, because we
Right.
swapped around so much. I mean, at
Yeah.
one point we were moving every 6 months to a year because of
Oh,
my
boy.
parents' work.
Right.
So it's
A
completely
lot of military families could identify with that because
absolutely, yeah.
they do move around quite a bit as well.
Yeah, for sure. But I say all of that to then bring it back to when I speak to my friends who are not used to change. It is incredibly scary for them. And I think back of one friend specifically, got offered this job I think it was in Chicago actually. And he was living here in Cape Town. And God rest his soul, because he actually passed on last year, but
Oh,
irrespective. He got offered this job and freaked out. And I was like, why are you freaking out? Like, this is amazing. It's, you know, 10 times your current wage that you're getting here. You get to
mm,
move and experience a new city. You know people there, because we have friends over there. Why wouldn't you want to do this?
mhm,
And it took me such a long time to realize just how traumatic even thinking about
mhm.
leaving behind his family, leaving behind the neighborhood that he'd grown up in, leaving behind all the friends that he'd grown up with, how
Right.
traumatic that would actually have, literally just to contemplate it was
Hmm.
traumatic for him. And then I suddenly, I was thinking about that in preparation for this podcast today, because I was just thinking that this is something that everybody goes through on an almost daily basis, maybe on a
Yes.
smaller degree, but because change is intrinsic, it's in everything. And if you want things to stay the same, well, you're in for a rude awakening. And I think
Right. That's what
it
this year has taught us. Well, we're going
absolutely,
on about 14 months now into this,
yeah,
and people um even eat the same foods every day, right? They're
right,
in such a routine that they eat the same. They're in the same pattern of food that they eat. I mean, I even caught myself a few months back. We go through cycles, I think, in our
mm,
body system, and I was like craving raisin toast every morning, and I basically ate that every morning for like a good like month or two. And then all of
wow,
a sudden it was just like, okay, well, time for a change now. Let's
yeah,
switch to oatmeal or something, right? So it was just funny because it really is about listening to our body. And, you bring up like such good points about this whole change piece that, we have to look within, and that's what's going to ground us. So what we're doing when we're afraid of that change, like
mm-hmm,
as your friend was afraid of those changes, it's not that he didn't, obviously he made those changes
yeah,
and he wanted change, but he was still holding on to those old patterns from the past that are already imprinted on the mind and in the emotions, right?
right.
They're blueprints already within us. So how do we really look at that and alter it? Well, first we have to be aware of it, right? We have to be like you had to become aware of his situation to understand it,
Yes.
right? You now, when you did that, had you already gone through your processing about your situations, how you like change all the time? Had you, or was it part of that whole process?
It was part of it. So It was kind of a learning curve for me because I was still not quite as empathetic, I
Hmm.
think, as I could have been or would have wanted to have been, because I really just it just didn't compute for me that this
Right.
would not be, an awesome adventure. Yes, I could understand a certain level of apprehension because I've been through that so many times. But
Hmm.
it's apprehension for me, not earth-shattering fear. So
This is just amazing because it's such a simple example, but it just speaks volumes. Because see, you had already dealt with those changes in your own life,
mm,
accepting change, moving through that change, motivating yourself, being motivated by change, and all of that. So once you now started to come to understand the flip side of that, it challenged you to stretch your understanding and to understand what he had gone through a little bit better and just understand it from a different perspective, right?
absolutely, yes, for sure. But now I have a little bit of a question for you, something that's actually just kind of occurred to me as we were talking about this in respect to, getting ready for big changes. Because the process that we spoke about in terms of integrating our shadow selves in our last episode
Hmm.
requires an acceptance of change. But I feel that even though we were talking about how scary that is, because I mentioned to you in the last episode that the conversation I had with actually the same friend was, I'm scared of who I'm going to become because I don't know who that is going to be. I don't know
Right.
who that person is. But I was able to move through it because it was a conscious evolution.
Right.
And I think that, and again, this is kind of the question that I'm posing, if you want to agree with me or disagree, is is change so scary because we don't allow it to be a conscious evolutionary process? We instead tend to be reactive.
I would have to say yes to that because what we do is we basically, for our listeners, we have the subconscious mind, which is all of our past experiences, everything from the time we
Hmm.
were even in vitro, right?
Right.
Um, when we came to be born, throughout our whole childhood and in our adult life. So we have all of these life experiences that create patterning and blueprints on our mind. So we've got our subconscious mind, then we've got our conscious mind. Our conscious mind is, just we walk about our life daily. We don't have to relearn to drive a car or ride a bike once we've learned. We just
Right.
automatically, we're on automatic pilot. And then we've got the super conscious mind. So the
Mm,
super conscious mind is where all the real fun begins because that's where we have that connection to spirit, to our soul connection, our higher
right.
being connecting with, consciousness, which is, God, the angels, universal wealth uh, of consciousness, of spiritual enlightenment, of
Mm,
answers, solutions, all of that, right? So you say, what is it that drives us and what can we do? Well, one, becoming aware of what's happening is super key
hmm.
because once we, like if your friend, was in a conversation with you, which I'm sure you probably, kind of walked him through some of that and helped him to grow into the change because of your own experiences, right? That's
Right.
why it's so cool. We're all so unique. We're all so different. We come,
Absolutely.
we come to this earth with our own purposes, with our own agenda, even though we don't know what that agenda is. It's not consciously made known to us until we start to do some of that deep inner work, that intrinsic work. But
Hmm.
gee, I kind of got off track. I was going somewhere with this. Oh, it's just the fact that really, when you look at it, is when we look within, if we take this microscope and we go within,
Mm-hmm.
Really, what it is that we're afraid of ourselves. We're
Oh,
afraid of everything that we could possibly be.
that is so true. And that is actually, I mean, that's something that I tell my clients all the time. Because whenever a client comes to me and goes, just by the way, I know that your corporate job is finance and you've been an entrepreneur before. I have this business idea, blah, 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 blah. Do you think it would work? And I always kind of put my my life coaching hat on and I say, well, the business plan that can be tweaked to fit the needs of the market and the client and all the rest of it and blah 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 fish paste. But the only reason that or I actually ask them, I'm like, why do you think you would fail? And
Mhm.
they always go, oh, because I'm scared. I'm scared of failure. Or no, sorry. The question is, why haven't you started this already? Because I'm scared of failure. And I go, no, it's
Mhm.
not that. It's that's the very surface level fear. But when you
Yes,
peel that away, there's another fear underneath that, which is usually, oh, what will people think of me? Blah blah blah.
that's right.
And then the next one down, the real one is you're scared of success.
That's right.
And
We're more scared of afraid of success than we are of failure. And you're right, as you start peeling those layers away, it's about, oh well, what will others think of me? Oh,
mm,
am I doing it right? You're questioning your education. Oh, well, can I do this because, oh, I don't have a master's degree or a PhD, but you spent, the last 10 years, in education, say getting a bachelor's degree or a
right.
college degree, and you've taken millions of other courses and you've worked in the field for 10, 20 years. You actually are so valuable because you actually have had hands-on experience working as a frontline worker, helping people or whatever the
What
case may be,
exactly? Yeah.
right? And
Well,
so there's so much more to it, and it's also what have other people said to you. And I don't want to say that it's always malicious. Sometimes people just don't think before they speak, and they say
sure.
their doubts come out, and they push those on to you. And so then,
Absolutely.
what does that do, right? What does that do? Stefan, it plays on our mind, right? It
Mm,
plays on our subconscious mind because that now has become a blueprint on our mind, and so now those thoughts are ruminating.
absolutely. And it's interesting that you bring up the issue of projection because it is very much that. I don't think it's that people are trying to be malicious when they're talking negatively about your ideas. It's that they're projecting their own fears onto
Yeah.
your idea. And I take it one step further with my clients. I say, do you know why success is so scary? And this, I'm bringing this straight back to our topic. And they go, well, why? I said, well, because it's going to require a massive change in your life. I said, think
Hmm.
about the fact that, consciously you know very little at any given point in time because you access, it's like I liken to a computer. Your conscious mind is your RAM. Your random access memory has only about between 2 and 8 gigs, depending on how fast your PC is. It's the same with your conscious mind. It doesn't have infinite space, where your subconscious mind is essentially the cloud. And your conscious mind has to go into the cloud to get into the soul to access information. And I said, but
Hmm.
what you have to understand then is your subconscious mind fully understands what this change is going to entail for your life. Your
Yes.
conscious mind doesn't fully understand, it just gets the impression of apprehension and maybe fear.
Yeah.
And I'll break it down further for them. I said, let's consider what like huge success for you could mean. I said, let's assume, for an instance, and I'm going to use one hypothetical example here, but let's assume for this particular client, they're wanting to start a business selling, I don't know, tacos. And their dream is to have the biggest franchise of taco trucks across North America. And they are willing to learn how to do that, take the business courses, the food courses, all that stuff, hire the right people, do the right things, make the right steps, put the right plans in motion, and get this dream off the ground. I say, but right now, you're working as, let's say, like you said, a frontline worker. You're earning, I don't know, what is a good wage in North America?
Well, it'd probably be around anywhere from $14 an hour to 26. So
Right.
we could take a median of like say 21.
21. Okay. So let's say $21 an hour you're earning. Given that you're living above the breadline, you're not poor by any stretch of the
Mm-hmm.
imagination, right? But
Right.
you're also not super wealthy by any
Right.
stretch of the imagination. As a result, your social circle has a certain element to it. It's not
That's
good,
right.
it's not bad, it just is what it is. I
Right.
said, now you go from that to owning the largest distribution of taco trucks in the North American region,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not earning $21 an hour, you're earning $1 million an hour. I'm being hyperbolic, of course, but you're earning a massive increase. I said,
Right.
is your social circle going to remain the same? Let's be honest.
Absolutely not.
It's
Absolutely
not.
not.
And it's
Because you're right. Like this whole piece about, you know how they always say, name the five people
right.
that are in your life, weekly, let's say. Maybe not
Mm,
every day, but anywhere from every day to weekly. That's where your level of acceptance in who you are is going
I'm
to.
so sorry about that, Rain. I'll edit that out. I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Um, that's where your circle of friends are, or acquaintances, or coworkers are, and that's where you're at. Let's just take some weird example. Like, let's say you work in an office and there's lots of gossip that goes on there.
Right.
Common for an office, oftentimes, right? So you have been taking some personal development courses, and you're really starting to feel uncomfortable when you go to work during the day because there's just so much gossip that happens. Now, I'm not talking about truth, when things are happening and there's truth there, and whatever you say, you could say to that person's face, because it is the truth, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
talking about, just spending your time lollygagging, gossiping. So now what starts to happen when that change starts to set in you? You now no longer want to go for coffee with the same group that's gossiping because it really makes you feel uncomfortable. And so
Right.
now you have to make a choice. Either you're going to continue in that pattern of behavior, or you're going to walk away and not be a part of that group at break, or you're going to stand up to them and you're going to say, something, guys, I really don't feel comfortable talking about this, and I think we should, talk about something else,
Mm.
or just, you just smoothly take people out of that conversation and talk about cars or whatever, the weather, whatever is interest you can navigate that conversation into. So, intrinsic change, I think, is difficult not only for each of us that goes through it, but it is also difficult for the people around us and for the people that are
Mm.
in our lives, because that means now they have to change too.
You make such a valid point around that, Rain, because I think we tend to forget that. And that is something that I often bring up again with my clients. I say,
Mhm.
when they say, oh, someone's being so mean to me, etc., obviously the first thing is, are they just projecting? And secondly, I say, from an empathetic standpoint, you are no longer the person that you used to be.
Right, right,
And this is a huge shift and a huge change for them, and we've just discussed how difficult change can be for some people.
right. And
Um,
you won't be the
you,
same person, because when you start, let's say you've worked all your, say for 10 or 20 years, and you decide to go back to university as an adult, which is what I did. And it was such a growth piece for me, like a learning curve, because now your life changes. That has to be your priority, right? Because you need to be able to pass those courses, and when you're paying into, you know for in North America costs, roughly a $60,000 education that you have to pay for when you're done. You want to make sure that you pass those courses, and you want to make sure that what you're the courses that you're taking and the degree that you're getting is going to benefit you in your work world when you've completed it. So change is really difficult for everyone, and we have to make choices, and when we do make those choices, it's going to create change, a ripple
Mm,
effect, right? And that change is in our family system. When we make, you make a point, and I do talk about this in my book actually, is when we make a choice for change to move to another city, say for work, for example.
right.
I mean, some people don't. Some people will just pack a backpack and they're gone. And I think, wow, how like, I don't know if I could do that, right?
Right.
I mean, but it just shows us that our safety and security is foremost in our
Mm,
subconscious mind. And that tends to point us in the direction of what we'll do. It's kind of like your example of, someone living in the same home, for 20 years. They've not known any other home.
right.
Change in moving to another home is going to be huge for them. They may have anxiety, they may have panic attacks, they may start to develop things like a cough, like a nervous tick. There are all kinds of, unfavorable things that could happen. But on the positive side of it, it could open up a whole new world for them, open up new connections, set them on a path
Mm.
of a course of a new career, new learning new skills, making new friends. There's just so many positive things as well.
Absolutely. And I think that is something that a lot of people maybe forget, or they see the positives, but it seems to be overshadowed by the scary potential negatives.
Yeah,
And
potential is the key word there, right?
right,
Because where there is optimism, there is pessimism, right? So where there's,
absolutely.
these positive pieces, there can also be the negative pieces that come. Sometimes I think what has to happen is you move along that pathway, that road. You're on the home stretch, and as you're moving along that learning curve, you need to integrate those two uh, experiences, pieces of information, continue gathering and bringing in new information and integrate them so that it works for you, which I feel like in your examples you have been able to do, as well as be influential in helping your friend integrate
Mm.
those.
Well, absolutely. The other thing, I mean, you've made a good point there about the potential negatives and the potential positives. But to your point on that, something that I also bring up a lot with my clients to kind of try and get them to, I guess, take the emotional charge, not out of it, but certainly lessen it to a degree,
Right.
is bring up the law of polarity. And that is that everything has to have both negative and positive. It cannot, one cannot exist without the other. It can't exist in a void. It's impossible
Right.
in this particular universe. And as a result of that, I go, let's look at everything top to bottom. Let's
Mm-hmm.
actually lay out the negatives because there must be 1,000. But let's look at how you can actually tackle them and deal with them if they do arise. And then let's look at the positives. How are you actually going to tackle and deal with that? And interestingly, they have zero game plan as to how to tackle the positives coming their way.
I was just going to say that was probably what happened.
Yeah, because again, to what we were saying earlier, people are massively scared of success. So they actually shove that out the way when it comes to making a huge changeful decision. And they focus on the negative and they go, well, I'm scared that this is going to happen, it's going to fail. And
Mm-hmm.
I go, yeah, but what if it actually succeeds? Are you prepared for what's going to happen? Do you know how you would do X, Y, Z? And they actually freeze more in fear at the success than they
Right.
do at the potential challenges,
Right.
because they're going, well, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how do I, coming back to our example of this massive taco truck distribution center. Um, how do I hire a board of directors? How do I do this? How do I do that? I have no idea. Right. Well, you do it by starting at the beginning and you work your way
Right.
through one success at a time. And if there's a failure along the way, it's not the end of the world. It's just a learning. And I think when we are able to recognize that both success and failure are both just learnings, neither one is bad or good.
Yes.
They're
Yes.
just
We
learning.
take we take that judgment out of it, because what's happening in the mind, because our mind tends to overwork. So
Mm,
we go to that mind piece and we do too much thinking. And then what happens is hey, I'm guilty of that for sure, because I mean, we tend to go into either the fight, flight, or freeze piece, right? So when you
right.
mentioned that, when you ask them that, they freeze. Because then what are the options if you freeze, because you don't know if you have it in you to fight for what you want, and
Mm,
you have that tendency, or we as human beings have that tendency to go into flight, because we know that's all, back from when we, caveman mentality. And when we go into that, or we have a choice to do either or, and we cannot choose, then we just freeze, because we
yes.
don't know what in the heck to do, right?
Mm,
And so then our mind can shut down, right? We
yep.
can go into depression, we can start to have anxiety or fear, or all of these sorts of things. And also, you made a really good point about the emotions, because our emotions play a role in it on this gray scale of one
Yep.
extreme to the other, right? So our emotions, we can allow our emotions to get pulled into it, and then that's when we start having the reactive stuff happening. Or when we downplay our emotions, then we just shut down, right?
That's it.
So
Yeah.
it's very challenging, wouldn't you say? Like, how in the heck does a person come to a place of, you know what, I got this. I can balance this all out. I can see both sides of the coin. I can see both extremes. How am I going to actually pull this off? So if I were your client, what would you say to me? How am I'd say, hey, Stefan, like, how am I going to pull this off? Like, I really want to do this taco thing, but how do I do it?
So, like I said earlier, the first thing I do is I make them face the possibility of failure and make them recognize that they have all the skills to weather that storm. If something goes wrong,
Right.
there is a plan B, there is a plan C, there is a plan D that you can implement. You've got the skills. And then it's going, now let's use that exact same methodology for the successes so that it's not so scary.
Mm-hmm.
But then I feel like the bigger thing and where the emotional attachment really comes in is not on the physical work that needs to be done. It's always around the mental and emotional and spiritual work
Mm-hmm.
that needs to be done.
Right.
So when we were talking about back early on in this episode about your social circle is going to start changing and that's traumatic for them, those skills are a little bit more difficult to teach because it requires a certain level of meditation, in
Right.
my opinion. It requires a certain level of self-awareness, and it requires a certain level of, I like to call it pre-forgiveness. You know,
That's
pre-forgiving
wonderful.
people for whatever they may or may not say in response to these changes that you're going through so
Right.
that you can actually weather that whole storm moving forward.
Right. And if I could add to that,
Mm,
um, so you talk about the self-awareness and the pre-forgiving, huge, huge, right? And
mm,
that helps us with our emotions, because we do have attachments. We have
yeah,
attachments to, our parents, our siblings, our friends, our partners, our children. All of these people in our lives have been significant, um, people in our lives that affect us and that help us to develop just as they.
Right.
So the other piece of it is connected to that pre-forgiving, and that can even move into forgiving, like the forgiveness itself. So none of us are ever done growing.
No.
And, I've had, some really cool things happen over the last couple of weeks where I've been needing to look at, okay, who am I really? And what am I doing? And am I doing what I want to be doing? And am I okay with the people? That all of these questions have just been flooding in, right? And then I look at, okay, it's time now to look at compassion, have compassion for myself and have compassion for others. So a lot of times, others hurt us or we hurt them, but it's not always done in a malicious way. It's that we're all just on our own journey and we're living our lives and we're making choices. And sometimes those choices do affect other people. Even, getting into a business relationship. You may get into a business relationship, and 2 years down the road, you've both sort of changed and outgrown the model that, let's say you opened up a warehouse store, and
Mm-hmm.
you were partners in running this warehouse company. But then as time went on, one person maybe wanted to expand the warehouse and go into a larger facility, and the other one wanted to go into more of a boutique style because they felt like they wanted to cater to uh, repeat customers and have like that personal connection and contact with them.
Right.
Completely different services for each other. So you just have to say to one another, no hard feelings. I really enjoyed this ride. It was awesome. It was amazing. And now it's time for us to each go our own way. So it's all about um, being a respecter of others. It's
Mm-hmm.
about forgiveness. It's about having compassion. And, this takes a certain amount of connection with, we talked about the mind, we talked about the emotions. It also takes a certain amount of connection with our inner awareness and
Mm-hmm.
awakening and connection with
Yes.
consciousness. So you talked
Yes.
about, I think you mentioned meditation. So we
Mm-hmm.
want to bring in meditation, visualization, prayer, saying mantras, positive mantras each day that help to nurture our soul, that help to grow our spirit, because our spirit is the piece that's the movement forward, and the spirit connects with the body, right? So
Mm.
once, like you say, once we kind of get those mind pieces straightened around and tackle, okay, are you afraid of success or failure, and you look at that and you examine it and you pick it apart and you take some positive action towards creating change in your mind, that can affect our emotions and settle our emotions a bit. But now we also can bring in those meditative pieces, the prayer pieces, the visualizing, to help pull all of those pieces together for us, because we're
Right.
one embodiment. I guess you'd agree to that, right?
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely. I would definitely agree with that. And I think everything that you've just said comes back to what we were saying right at the outset about making the change, taking it from unconscious or reactive to a conscious process where we have an expected outcome that we are
mhm.
working towards. Then the change is not so scary because, well, you know what you're trying to achieve, and you're not just reacting from the caveman mentality of
Right, you're
which way do
responding.
I go? Yeah, exactly.
You're responding instead of reacting.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that that is a beautiful way to describe this whole thing because I mean, coming back to the headline for our topic today, intrinsic change, it's in everything. And if you
Yeah.
start to practice these methodologies that we've actually laid out in this particular podcast on big changes that are coming your way or big changes that you're planning, I foresee that people would be able to use this just in everyday small changes
Mhm.
and go,
And
huh,
Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead. Go ahead.
No, no, that's right. You want to say?
Well, in intrinsic change and change period, we see that it's external as well as internal.
Mm,
And
absolutely.
it's also our subconscious, uh like those blueprints, the fears, the guilt, the well, if you know, if I leave my job, how's my family going to survive? How, you know,
Right.
I'm used to bringing in, you know, $4,000 a month. How, what if I don't bring that in every month? Then, you know, everyone's going to suffer. So it's those recordings and those thoughts that play over in our mind.
Mm.
And and I'm sure that, you know, in the work that you do, that you can bring people to a place of feeling greater safety and security in the decisions that they're making through this process you're talking about.
Yes, and well, and vice versa for yourself, because like you were saying, starting to treat it as a whole process, not individual parts. Treat it
Right,
as, you're doing the physical work, you're doing the mental work, you're doing the emotional work, but you're also doing the soul work. And
right.
then suddenly everything just becomes, I never say easy because it's not, but it is simple.
Yes. I think what happens too is that, like you say, it's not easy, but it becomes crystal clear.
Right.
Because when we do the work of all the parts, we address, like you say, confront the mind stuff, we address the emotions, and we look now at the consciousness piece and the soul and what the soul wants. We can now pull ourselves and bring ourselves into an acceptance of belief. And so our faith and our belief that we can do whatever we set our mind to. So now we are, you know, we are being taking a risk. We're looking at risk taking as a positive model and not a negative model, because we've already done the other pieces. We've looked at it mentally to see, okay, what would be the pros and cons. We've looked at it emotionally. We
Mm,
perhaps, you know, waited until we had a savings account set in place that could cushion a person, you know, starting out a business in that way for
right.
a few months if they've got, you know, family responsibilities. So it's not going at it with a blasé, you know, bull in the china shop uh, piece, although we can do that and it can work for us. I mean, how many millionaires and billionaires have said, you know, I just took a chance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that that can work. I don't like to promote it for
No, of
obvious
course
reasons.
not. No.
And especially because I think that doing the kind of work that we do in the spiritual community, I think a lot of people like to think that it's all just positive affirmations and mantras, and that's what's going to get you
Yes.
through. And I'm like, no, that's a component of the whole.
Right.
Um, but there is actual work that needs to be done as well. And that,
Yes.
yeah, I always go back to the scripture. I forget where, I think it's in Romans, where it says faith. No, actually, it might be in the Gospels. Forgive me, but where it says faith without works is dead. And
Right.
I always say, if you're praying for something, you still have to put the work in. God and or the universe or whatever you want decide to call it cannot bless something that you haven't done. So, you got to pick up that shovel and start digging if you want to hit gold or
Right.
oil.
If you put the work in,
Yeah,
it's going to come back to you at some point. And you do make a good point that, you know, you're not going to promote, you know, blase risk taking. But
mm,
there are people that, you know, get into situations where that is the only option. Let's
absolutely.
say, you know, let's say a couple is together and one of the partners leaves, or they pass away and there is no savings.
Mm,
There is no life insurance policy, and the partner that is left now has to come up with double the income to continue to secure their living space, to continue caring for their family. There are times when we have to, you know, push ourselves forward and continue to do the work, look at things logically, look at things in a practical way, but
Mm,
also look at possibilities and look at, if I were to do this, what are the overwhelming possibilities that could happen for me, you know, to increase my income, to promote whatever work it is that I'm investing my time into.
right. And that obviously applies to every aspect of life, whether if it's business that you're trying to start, or if you're wanting to find a new life partner, or just have new friends in your life. What I think that is a brilliant question to ask. What are the overwhelming possibilities that could come my way if I just do this thing?
Right.
And I think you've
I
actually
guess
just,
I guess it's about believing in yourself,
yes,
right?
absolutely, absolutely. And being able to look at it with, like you say, like with a keen eye, and go, okay, this is the hand I've been dealt. This is the change that has been thrust on me in this situation. How do I make the best of it? What do I do? And
I, I
taking,
love I
yeah,
love that. I love that, Stefan. Like the hand that we've been dealt, because
yeah,
not everyone has this cookie cutter, life of perfection. It just it can exist for some people. I believe that, but that
yeah.
is not all.
That's that's probably not the majority. That's the majority is the opposite, where life has just been happening to people, happening to us, as opposed to us being co-creators in the lives that we exist in. And I think that's kind of, oh gosh, just saw how long we've been chatting for. This always
I was
happens.
just going to say, what a wonderful way to end the podcast,
Yeah,
because I think one thing we have to remember above all is that we are co-creators. We are co-creators with our own soul, with our own mission, our own purpose. We're co-creators with the other side and the
mm,
universal hemispheres. We're co-creators with people on the earth. So we are co-creators, and I just love the way that you phrase that.
thank you. So yeah, you also said it quite beautifully earlier. We are so incredibly powerful. And I think the thought that I want to leave people with is, as a co-creator, start to embrace slowly but surely the sheer magnitude of the power that you have within.
Yes. Well,
And
thank you so much.
thank you, Rain. I really appreciate your time as always today. This has been unprecedented with Rain and Stefan. I look forward to our next podcast, where obviously we'll be talking about just wonderful topics that uplift humanity.
Absolutely.
Rain, take care. Have a wonderful day further. And
You
it's
as
just about
well.
time for dinner for me.
All
Speak
right,
soon.
Stefan.
Thank
Have a
you.
great day. Bye
Cheers,
now.
then. Bye.